Kia ora koutou team. This short video is just to take you through how you might attack Task 1B for 3.2. Task 1B, essentially what it's asking you to do is to do two things really, or three things. The first thing is you are to look at the skill, and you are to break it down into the preparation phase, the execution phase, and the follow-through phase, and discuss what the biomechanical or main biomechanical principles are within each of those phases, and how they help meet the mechanical purpose of each phase, and then also how that then impacts on the overall execution of the skill or the goal of the skill. What we've done so far is we have broken down the perfect technique, and you've looked at what the perfect technique is. You've looked at the mechanical purpose for each of the phases of the perfect technique, and you've looked at the main biomechanical principles. That information is up on Classroom. You did that as a class, and I took a photo of the whiteboard, but you've also got it in your booklets. That's going to form the first part of your Task 1B. So for example, what you've got is a PE Think, which is this document, which is on Google Classroom. Whoop. Not sure if that actually helped, but you'll see it. It's called the 3.2 Perfect Technique PE Think. In the first what, how and why, what you have to do is for each of the phases, execution, the prep, execution and the follow-through phase, you are to identify what the main biomechanical principle is in each phase, how and why that's used in each phase, in terms of how does it impact on the mechanical purpose, and then also how does that interrelate with other biomechanical principles to produce that, or to help with the mechanical purpose. For example, if we have a look at what you guys did for the main biomechanical purpose for the preparation phase, we had a look at force summation as being the main thing, the main biomechanical principle, and the things that you chose to interrelate with that are Newton's second law and Newton's third law. So how do those interrelate? Remembering as well that you have to bring in your functional anatomy, and how does that support your answer. So for example, if you're talking about force summation in the preparation phase, when you go to flex your knees, that's flexion of the knees is functional anatomy. That shows me you know the knowledge. And what you then is going from flexion of the knees to extension as you jump of the knees, where the agonist is the quadriceps and the antagonist is the hamstrings. So that's kind of basic functional anatomy brought in to support your answer. So just to recap, what you're doing is identifying the main biomechanical principles for each of the phases of the skill. So the prep, execution, follow-through phase. You are looking at how and why they are actually applied, how they interrelate with other biomechanical principles, and that's very important to get minimum for merit. And then also you're looking at how and why, you're looking at how functional anatomy can support that answer. That's the what, how, and why of the PE Think. For the so what is you're looking at then your technique and comparing and contrasting it to the perfect technique. So what you will do in class with is to do a compare and contrast chart, and basically that's just looking at each of the phases. So for example, the preparation phase, you're looking at what the performance goal or the mechanical purpose of that phase is. You'll look at what the similarities are between the technique, the perfect technique, and your technique, or your technique and the perfect technique. And then you look at the major differences between those two, between your technique and the perfect technique, or the technique errors. And then you're going to be breaking down how and why that actually impacts on the ability of you to meet the mechanical purpose of each phase. So for example, if you've got a force summation error because you're not flexing the knees enough, or using your arms enough, etc., that impacts on force summation. That impacts on the amount of force you can generate. That then impacts on the vertical height of the jump, which is the mechanical purpose of that phase. Okay, so that's what you're trying to do, is compare and contrast. And then finally, the third part of that is, once you've made those recommendations, those compare and contrasts, you're going to make some feed forward or feedback to yourself on what are you going to do to concentrate on to try and improve the execution of that phase. That's pretty simple, because you would have identified the errors, and then therefore the advice or the feedback or feed forward should be pretty straightforward. So, just to recap, what you're looking at in task 1B is doing a what. So you're identifying for each of the phases what the main principle is. You're doing a how and why, and that's how and why that main principle was employed, but also how and why it interrelates with other principles to meet the mechanical purpose of each phase. As well as that, what you are doing after that is you are doing a so what. So you are looking at then, well, that's the perfect technique for that phase. What does mine look like? It's a compare and contrast. So what you are doing is, these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses, and then also saying how those weaknesses impact on the ability to meet the mechanical purpose of that particular phase, subphase. And then finally, based on that comparison and analysis, you are going to make some feedback or feed forward to yourself about how you, or what you're going to concentrate on to improve for that phase. And you do that per think, one for the preparation phase, one for the execution phase, one for the follow through phase. That's task 1B. If you do that well, we're sitting at merit already. Okay, alright. So sorry about the long video, but it's a really an important part, okay, of task 3.2. Task 1B is a very important task of 3.2. Alright, all good, get to it, and remember, I'm always available for feedback through Classroom. Ka kite.